Welcome to the Fallon Forum. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Certainly was fantastic weather. We have a lot of ground to cover today. I think I say that a lot, and I think I mean it. We're going to talk about the latest NSA revelations and how they are causing consternation on both the Democratic and Republican sides of the U.S. House and Senate. I guess that's good news. We're going to talk about how, due to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, hundreds of juvenile sentences could be appealed, although I'm sure that Governor Branstad will be finding a way to make sure that doesn't happen, as he did last year. We're going to talk about how the number of green jobs are up here in central Iowa. We're going to, again, if we have time for all this, we're going to look into a complaint alleging that the Iowa Department of Human Services has actually violated federal law and state law relevant to providing basic public education to the kids incarcerated, let's call it that, incarcerated at the Iowa Juvenile Home. We're also going to talk about how the state looks to be moving in the direction of some kind of an agreement on water quality. This has taken 6 years, and the big question is it going to do anything of any value to those of us who want to see our water cleaned up? We're also going to look at this bizarre, This story proves to me that coal is not just bad for the climate, it's bad for our court system. This story from West Virginia about amazing corruption at the county judicial level. Wow, we're going to talk about that. Maureen McHugh is going to join us later in the program to talk about the Nuclear Neighborhoods Project. I know that's not an effort to try to get everybody to have their own neighborhood nuclear deterrent. Just because the neighbors get a small nuclear device doesn't mean you need to as well. No, something very, very different from that. But first, I just got to start out with a little reflection. And this is what happens when I wake up too early. Like 4:30 this morning. I wake up too early, I get up too early, and this is the sort of things that just happen. I start thinking. Oh, man, do you ever have that problem where you start thinking? Oh, it's horrible, isn't it? Okay, so I started thinking about the climate march next year, and beyond the impact that the climate march might have on the climate crisis itself, and we have reason to believe that a march of that scope and scale could have a big impact, as marches like that have had in the past. So beyond that, what is it going to be like to have 8 months of communal living, essentially? Communal living, 1,000 people living in tents, eating together, walking together, organizing together around this issue. What is that going to be like? It's going to have a profound effect on those of us involved, as it did as was similarly the case with the Great Peace March back in 1986. And I first started thinking about this about a week ago after had a wonderful dinner party. Some of the folks involved with marching, some of the staff came over for dinner, and then beautiful evening on so many levels. And then boom, it just ended, just gone. And I started thinking about, wow, how what a jarring ending to an otherwise wonderful evening. But what do you do? That's the way things are set up in this society. Everything is regimentalized. Not a word, Maddie, but I like it anyhow, and you know what it meant, so it doesn't matter. Regimentalized. Put it in the dictionary for me, would you? Okay, so, in today's world, I call this today's program institutionalized isolation. Isolation is not just accepted as normal and natural in our modern world. Really, it has become institutionalized. We have created structures that assure isolation is going to occur. And just look at our living spaces. I mean, you get up in the morning. Oftentimes you're in your own bed. If you're lucky, maybe you aren't. Oftentimes you're in your own home. More and more people live by themselves or in small units. And then you're off to your cubicle. And you get to your cubicle, by and large, in your private vehicle. And when you come home, you're into your private home or your efficiency apartment. Maybe your private home is unlike the old homes in neighborhoods where I live, where you've got a big front porch. And again, a big front porch. What does that say? It says, "Hey, neighbors, let's talk. Let's dialogue. Let's not be isolated." Instead of the big front porch, and again, this is starting to change, so this is encouraging. But since the 1970s, instead of the big front porch, we get the big front garage. What a different message that sends. It says, it doesn't say come by and sit up here and rock with me for a bit and let's compare the notes and let's talk about how my kid has been mischievous and you can tell me all the things I don't know about that. No, you got a big front garage which says, "Hey, I'm home now, leave me alone." And instead you might have a back deck surrounded by a huge privacy fence. You think about the cubicle, the private vehicle, the well-secured residence, again, not just physically, but also probably with a security system. And you think about all the many different screens that dominate our day. I mean, we've got screens everywhere. Right here, you're looking at a screen. Okay. So, I mean, maybe some people see that as hypocrisy, but part of that that's the institutionalization I'm talking about. This is how we work, how we communicate, how we live. You know, most of us really throughout our entire day are physically cut off and to some extent spiritually cut off from the people in our communities, even sometimes from our own family members, from our friends. Again, there are some ways in which Facebook and email can help connect people. But you see something, you get the word out quickly, and then boom, something can happen. Unfortunately, I think most of what happens on Facebook and online in email stays there. Most of what happens in front of a screen remains between that person and that screen. So beyond that, I mean, beyond space, time itself has been institutionalized. I mean, we don't have this natural flow from morning to afternoon to evening into the night. We have these regimented blocks of time. We have 9 to 5. We have the noon whistle going off. And again, there's some logic to that. I understand why there's some sense to that. But on the other hand, it creates an artificial set of distinctions that I think get in the way of people behaving more naturally, coming together more normally, as they would have done in simpler times. And as I think we are longing to do that and finding ways of doing that, even in this very institutionalized, this age where isolation has become much more institutionalized. So I had this reflection the other day. I was remembering a party in Ireland. I was only in my 20s, I think, and didn't know most of the crowd. I mean, it was one of those nights where you go from pub to pub, and the pubs closed at 2. And when they close, people might not be ready to call it a night. And there was about 24 of us. And again, I had a couple cousins in the bunch. I don't think I knew many other people beyond that, but we all went off to somebody's home nearby one of the pubs. And we sat around a room, a medium-sized room, big room by Irish standards. Again, 24 of us. And people were just packed together. And we were singing quietly. We weren't talking much at all, actually. We were just kind of sitting and kind of debriefing the day. And again, this is just like a couple hours earlier, we were belting out "God Bless England" and all the great rowdy Irish songs that talk about Irish independence and the spunk of the Irish. And we were in these pubs back then. They were just smoke filled. They were loud. You'd have to talk loud to be heard. You'd have to strain your ear in order to hear. And then here we were, that wasn't the end of the day. That wasn't the appropriate, the pubs closed at 2:00. Boom. Everything's done at 2. Well, yeah, everything was done at 2 because there was a law that pubs had to close at 2. But people weren't done because that was a lousy way to end the day. A much better way to end the day. Sitting around with the people that you had bonded with for the past several hours and just kind of gradually letting that energy that had built up through the course of the evening, letting that energy come down again, to relax, to kind of pull back, to kind of close the experience of the day with the same people that you found bonding with earlier in the evening. Those kinds of natural, logical, normal, healthy transitions don't happen in a world that has become so focused on time, on blocks of time, on units of time, in a design that is focused on units of work, of play, of living. And all, a lot of our design considerations, really, they should be about how to keep us warm and dry. But also this should be about how to connect us, not isolate us. And that's the problem. We become much more accustomed to a living arrangement where we are separated from each other. And that's certainly true. That's certainly true more now, I think, than it ever was before. So as I am thus pondering, again, this experience in Ireland was just, when it popped back into my mind, I was thinking, wow, I'd forgotten all about that. This came back to me, and I remember it really clearly now that I think about it. You know, you can't, the kind of decompression we had in that stranger's room, 24 of us, after a rowdy, fun evening, that decompression where we just sang quietly, just kind of, we were in each other's presence. That doesn't happen. You can't do that alone in your car. You can't do that when you're, when you're back in your cubicle. You can't do that in the scary place of your own mind. You've got to connect with others, and you certainly can't do it in front of a screen. And here we are again in front of a screen. Again, part of the design. I would rather be sitting down at the waterway at 13th and Locust, talking with a bunch of people, listening to a bunch of people. This is the way we have now crafted things to work. So, it's I think maybe look at it this way: the rhythm of life, of existence, is much more meaningful when you share it with your family, your friends, your tribe, if you will, your village. And what again, beyond the impact that the climate march is going to have on the climate crisis, I'm very excited to see what kind of impact we will have on ourselves, on each other. I mean, think about it. This is 1,000 people migrating across the continent. I mean, migrating is not foreign to the human condition. It may be foreign to the modern condition, but it's still in our genetic code. We learned how to be who we are, getting from place to place on foot. Whether it was a few hundred years ago or tens of thousands of years ago, we've moved around a lot, and this is in our genetic code. And this will be a recreation of that experience in many ways. Walking 15 miles a day, living basically, you never quite know where you're going to end up. You find the best tenting spot, side by side with other tents, dining with a lot of people that you come to know pretty well through the sharing of blisters and sweat and sunburn and being lashed by raindrops, and also, most important, by a sense of purpose, by a sense of common destiny, a sense of common direction of moving physically from one end of the country to the other, and politically, if you will, the direction of moving from the denial that we currently see our country in when it comes to the climate crisis to, ideally, this is the ideal vision. You get to Washington, D.C., and the gradual awakening of consciousness in this country has become so influenced by this migratory force that you suddenly see the kind of changes you've been wanting to see for a long time. Not to say that everything else that hasn't happened leading up to this isn't also important, but what happens in that experience, it's hard to say, but I do think I see it as a kind of a fantastic experiment, if you will, on not just I mean, we have to learn how to live well with others. There's going to be problems, challenges. There'll be compromises to make. There'll be ways in which we have to transform ourselves as we learn how to work together to transform our society. So I'm fascinated to see how the experience of abandoning isolation completely, again, we'll probably be craving some privacy, some space, and those are legitimate needs, of course. But we'll be in a very, very different environment than most moderns find themselves. Time won't be as important. I don't think there's any sense in saying we're going to start promptly. We're going to start marching today promptly at 8 o'clock. It'll probably be more, we're going to start marching about a half hour after sunrise, that sort of thing, And we're going to have lunch break when we've marched 9 miles, that sort of thing. It's not as much about the clock as it is about a whole bunch of other factors that have much more to do with natural cycles than they do with any kind of human cycle imposed on one's life. Anyway, it'll be interesting, and I'm excited to see what the experiment generates, in addition, again, to the hopefully very, very positive impact it has on the climate crisis. I want to, before we move on to a few other issues and then later to Dr. Maureen McHugh, I want to thank the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club and Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility for helping to sponsor this program. Also, I want to thank the Great March for Climate Action. I want to thank Gateway Marketing Cafe for sponsoring this segment of our show. And yes, I am making a trip to Gateway later because, I need some groceries. And they have a great selection. A lot of it comes from Iowa producers, Iowa farms. And also they've got breakfast, lunch, and supper in their fantastic cafe and deli. I want to thank all of our sponsors. And again, you can go online, folks, to fallonforum.com and check out the other businesses and organizations that make the show possible. I'll be back in just 2 minutes.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Well, good morning. This is the 7th of June in the Lord's year 2010, and this is day 1 of webcast1live.com. We will begin with Max World Live with my special guest, Tom Coates. In just a minute, there's Tom. Wait. Howdy. And we will be live for the very first time on Webcast One Live. Someday we're going to look back on this and say, gosh, remember that old day in history? Wonder where Walter Cronkite was. He must have been around hanging there too. But actually, it's the beginning of Webcast One Live. And thank you for listening. Thanks, Rob Spearman, and everybody who's put together this project together. And we're ready to go live now. So thanks for listening to MaxWorldLive.com.
I can't tell you that it's going real well from time to time, but it is going.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back, folks, and I want to thank some of the folks who make the show possible. Story County Veterinary Clinic. That's Dr. Kim Holding. Check him out on Highway 30 between Ames and Nevada. Moving a little bit further to the east, Dan Kelly, a state representative from Newton. Check out Dan Kelly and his real estate business. Again, Newton, great little town that's come a long way considering what happened to it with the Maytag loss. I also want to thank Community CPA and Associates for sponsoring this program. Community CPA, now the 10th largest accounting firm in the state. And also back to Newton, Diana's Wedding Cakes. If you've got a wedding coming up or another function, check out Diana, not just for cakes, but cupcakes. Yeah, cupcakes. And cookies as well. And I want to thank the Immigrant Entrepreneur Summit for sponsoring this segment of our conversation. Before I go to a different topic here, I do got to share an email with you. This is my, I like to refer to him as my nemesis. Dan Frummold, he always has something unpleasant to say to me, and that's okay. I expect that from him. But because of, I sent out an email this morning similar to what I just shared with you regarding the Great March for Climate Action and the communal nature of our living that we can expect to see on that march. And he wrote back, I knew it, a closet commie Well, not so closet. Yeah, I suppose you could say that the family unit is communist, whether it's a nuclear family or an extended family. Yeah, that's an example of communism, Dan. But just because one concedes, and you would have to be denying something to not concede this, to not agree with me. Just because a family operates in a somewhat communistic way, again, hopefully the parents are making the decisions on some stuff. But things are shared in common, Just because a family does that doesn't mean you believe that should apply to the economic system. So yeah, I totally support and am enthralled by the communal aspects of the climate march. Does that mean I think our economy should be run as a communist country? No. Okay. Anyway, but you're welcome to make those illogical leaps of faith if you so want to. Well, I want to talk about one thing here briefly, and then let's go to a phone call with Dr. Maureen McHugh. I got to just point out to you this the situation in West Virginia. I'm just kind of shocked about this. Okay, so apparently corruption is no stranger to this corner of West Virginia, where it's the home of the legendary feud between the Hatfields and McCoys. In 1988, a former sheriff there was convicted of selling his office for $100,000. In 2002, the county clerk resigned to avoid prosecution. In 2007, a prosecutor was admonished by the State Bar Association for subpoenas from his office issuing. They were issued for a county commissioner's financial records. It just goes on. And the most recent thing is the federal prosecutors are indicting a Mingo County Circuit Judge, Michael Thornsberry, on 2 counts of conspiracy. And again, they refuse to comment. Neither Thornsberry nor his attorney are inclined to comment about this. But what happened was Thornsberry tried, between 2008 and 2012, he tried to frame a guy named Robert Woodruff for crimes including drug possession, larceny, and assault. I mean, the guy didn't do these things. Why was he trying to frame him? Well, the judge had been having an affair with his secretary, and he tried to eliminate the competition after he tried to break things off. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example in the movies, but I don't watch enough movies to come up with one. So the indictment of Thornberry, it said that Thornsberry wanted a friend to plant a magnetic metal box containing drugs on Woodruff's vehicle. The friend didn't go through with it. When that failed, the prosecutor said the judge got a state trooper to file a false complaint against Woodruff for larceny. Now, the officer, who was also apparently named Trooper of the Year in 2009, was placed on administrative leave. It just goes. It's amazing. As bad as our system is, and I've known plenty of breaches of justice here in Iowa, but nothing like that. That steals the cake. I'm duly impressed, West Virginia. Keep the Hatfield and McCoy tradition going, and let's switch gears. I want to go to the phone and welcome Dr. Maureen McHugh to the program with us. She's with Physicians for Social Responsibility, and that group is working on a program called the Nuclear Neighborhoods Project. Maureen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me.
And I hear nuclear neighborhoods, and I think, well, does that mean everybody on the block gets a nuclear weapon, or?
No, it means something akin to some of what you've been talking about.
Good.
The deception and the secrecy and lies about our status in terms of our health relative to all of the nuclear weapons that we continue to produce, the threats they pose, the money we put into them, the numbers of secret medical tests that were done, the numbers of workers. All of these sorts of things are not very well known by the public. And yes, indeed, we all do live in a nuclear neighborhood, depending on how you want to define your neighborhood.
Yeah. So, is this a project that's been going on for a while? Is there some?
Well, what we did, backtrack just a wee bit. Most years, many of us in PSR who are concerned about the ongoing threat of a nuclear exchange, given that we have somewhere between 17,000 and 20,000 nuclear weapons on the planet, we all kind of focus our attention a little bit in August when we remember Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But this year we wanted to make it a much bigger thought because, we're already beginning to forget about Fukushima, which continues to put out hundreds of tons of nuclear waste from the facilities where the accident occurred.
Still going on.
Yes, yeah. And, that we had this battle here in Iowa about whether or not we were going to build new nuclear power plants. And so we wanted to expand the discussion to look at how closely related these two efforts are, the weapons complex and the energy complex, and how both of them pose a great deal of threat to our health all around the planet. Our old plants are aging and beginning to have problems. All of the weapons plants continue to produce and modernize weapons at a great cost to our economy. And, what people don't know is how many people have been deliberately or secretly exposed all along the whole trail over time and space of the nuclear weapons, nuclear power complex.
Well, my dad was a cancer victim. Compliments of exposure to radiation when he was stationed in California as a sergeant in the U.S. Army. And how many people have been affected adversely one way or the other? I mean, when you think about when you think about victims of nuclear war or power, you think mostly about Chernobyl, about Fukushima, about and then you think about Hiroshima, Nagasaki. But I think
forget Hanford. We forget
Hanford in Washington
Savannah
State.
River.
Sure.
We forget places in Colorado. We forget the fact that right in our backyard there's a nuclear weapons plant going up to modernize and reassemble nuclear weapons parts. I mean, the industry goes on and on and on, but it does so with a lot of secrecy and obfuscation, and particularly obfuscating the connections between the two as we continue, to produce all kinds of waste. The largest sources of nuclear radiation are sitting outside of all of our power plants, and we don't know what to do with the damn stuff. And it'll be around for thousands and thousands of generations.
Yeah, and there are a number of connections here between nuclear power and nuclear weapons that people, fail to make. I mean, we tend to think of it. I believe when we consider the possibility of, for example, Iran going nuclear. Yeah, but we don't think about all the other. I mean, how easy would it be to steal some of this stuff? I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be that easy, but we've got so many nuclear power plants and so much. I mean, here in the U.S., there's no central repository for spent nuclear fuels.
No.
And who wants it? I mean, really, they don't want it in Yucca Mountain in Nevada. And we certainly, I mean, I'm tempted to see if Steve King would take it up there in Northwest Iowa in his little town of Huron. But the truth is, nobody wants it. Nobody wants it anywhere.
Nobody wants anybody moving it. I mean, once
moving
it
it.
starts
Yeah,
moving it's. We like to refer to it as the mobile Chernobyl. I mean, if none of our trains ever went off track, if none of our trucks ever got into accidents, if none of our bridges ever had problems, if we never had snowfall, et cetera, perhaps we could move it from these hundreds of storage sites. However, recent history might tell us that the risks are indeed real. If we move it, and the risks are indeed real if we don't move it. And clearly, when you're in a hole, stop digging.
Yeah. Well, basic common sense there. So again, a neighborhood nuclear project. I mean, when people hear that, they think about. They think about putting it close to home. I'm trying to get a better grasp myself of what the focus of the project is.
Okay, well, unfortunately, you're in a different county, but we have put up 3 really big and I think intriguing and engaging installations where we combined art, history, archive, science, at the Iowa City Public Library, at the Solon Public Library, and at the University of Iowa Medical Library. So people can go in, and the biggest installation is at the medical library. We set it up like a neighborhood with doors, windows, fences, mailbox, etc., to check out our nuclear neighborhood. And we feature the current status of the health of our nuclear workers. It was an interesting study done by Dr. Lar Fortis here in Iowa and assisted by Arjun Makajani, who is a PhD physicist. And then it also features a wonderfully disturbing map of the Great Lakes region, how many nuclear installations are around that, another map of the cumulative radiation fallout that came over the entire country during the hundreds of above-ground tests that were done in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, early 70s. Includes some lovely ink washes that was done by a local artist during the Fukushima time with the iconographic images of all the people who would be tested in Fukushima for radiologic contamination, the children, the disaster in general. So, and then some nice haiku pulled together by some of our Japanese students about both Fukushima and Hiroshima, and so on. So a lot of neighborhoods being emphasized throughout that display. Then over at Solon, we have a whole lot of work by children, by and for children, their response to the idea of a nuclear threat, including a classic series of what do they call those comic books? They're no longer called that. Graphic novels that are used in Japan and elsewhere about what it meant to grow up in a war economy and have to respond after the dropping of the bombs. It's a children's story.
And Maddie knows the name for this.
They're mangas or mangas.
Mangas?
It may be. Barefoot Jen is the hero of the book, the child hero.
Yeah.
And so we featured that, and Sadako's story. She's the little girl who survived
paper cranes,
the bombing, but then developed a leukemia and tried to save her life by making the cranes. And now children all over the world make the cranes as a request for peace.
Right.
And so that's what's at Solon.
So this presentation, it's something that you can find in certain neighborhoods, Iowa City, Solon.
And
two different places.
Putting it up at the Memorial Union in September. And we're having lots of films and lots of discussions also on all the aspects of the topic. So, for instance, tomorrow night we have a speaker from Kansas City where the efforts to modernize the nuclear weapons factory there is going on, how Kansas City is responding to the cost, the diversion of resources, as well as impacts on the workers. And then next week we have Yashir Vasev, who's the head of the UNA here in Iowa, talking about the changing relations between the U.S. and Iran in the new Iranian administration. You know, they just had an election there.
Right.
And we have talked about the ongoing threats from our leaking, aging, dying nuclear power industry in this country. And we've been showing films, and we will continue to have speakers and films throughout September, primarily at the university.
Yeah, so I mean, part of the point is that your particular neighborhood might not be you may not have a nuclear power plant there. You may not have people dying of radiation poisoning, but there are lots of neighborhoods around the world that have been very directly, adversely, and severely affected by either.
But all of us, in fact, are being subjected to unnecessary risk without our consent.
Right.
Given that we have close to 20,000 nuclear weapons around the world, with their particularly horrific effects, the fact that thousands of them are in hair trigger alert that would launch on warning, the fact that there have been many, many near mishaps on our nuclear-powered submarines.
Now, it used to be that missiles would launch on warning against the USSR, which does not exist anymore. So, and again, I can't remember how many nuclear weapons we had back during the height of the Cold War.
Well, we had more than we do now, but we still have close to 9,000 in the U.S. and 10,000 in Russia, and they are still aimed at each other, even though supposedly we are not enemies, although there's a lot of tension between us.
There's a lot of tension right now, maybe we have one actually targeting Edward Snowden's residence.
Hey, perhaps.
I don't know. But yeah, it just doesn't make sense in a world where we have moved beyond that type of global confrontation. It doesn't make sense to maintain an arsenal of 10,000 on either side.
Right. It's been calculated that over the next 10 years, something like $640 billion is budgeted to maintain this arsenal that supposedly we're never ever going to use.
Yeah.
So
I mean, and really, you can't.
Economic costs.
I mean, it seems like to me the most serious threat relevant to nuclear weapons is the possibility that some rogue nation or some crazy individual or some very crafty terrorist could haul one of those into downtown Manhattan or downtown Des Moines, for that matter, or the Padmore in Iowa City, and wreak havoc.
Who are nuclear armed, who we continue to destabilize.
Yeah, and you can't fight that scenario with any number of nuclear weapons aimed at any number of cities.
No, we have some major global crises looming, and none of them are going to be solved by a nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon is not going to deal with climate change and impending famine. A nuclear weapon is not going to deal with the global inequities of, economic insecurity. It's not going to deal with the fact that we already have 1 billion people who are very hungry. It's not going to deal with the fact that people have unequal access to the world's resources, and that the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. The kinds of problems that the globe is facing with an expanding population and a diminishing resource base are not going to be solved by nuclear weapons. And yet, we put this kind of money into them. We, put our resources, our intellectual resources, etc., into them. And they're part of what drive, our power when we already have the most powerful military on the planet, even not counting nuclear weapons. So the whole thing is, as far as we're concerned, not only crazy, but really, really risky.
Now, President Obama has stated his goal of eliminating nuclear weapons.
Yes, he has stated it.
How's this? Let's give him a report card. How does PSR rate the president's performance on that promise?
Well, I say he performs very well. Does he get anything done is the question. We heard similar kind of happy talk from any number of our prior presidents, but they don't seem to have a lot of control over whole nuclear industry.
Why not?
And that's part of the question about transparency versus secrecy.
So do you think is it a lack of desire? Is Obama just paying lip service to the idea of nuclear disarmament, or is he incapable of cutting through the corporate and military forces that don't want any change?
I think it's probably the latter, because he came into office 5 years ago saying he was going to cut it, and we did get through New START, and that was very difficult in December of 12, but since then, not a whole lot has happened. That allowed us to have some transparency between the U.S. and Russia about what our forces are and who they're aimed at.
Yeah. Do you see the Russians as more? I mean, they, according to what you just said, we have 9,000 nuclear weapons. They have 10,000. Are they just as unwilling to, seriously move toward nuclear disarmament, or is there a different flavor on this issue in that country?
Well, there is a different flavor in terms of what those weapons are and where they are, and how powerful they are. It's hard to compare absolute numbers of weapons simply because they have different explosive power, and some are, like I said, ready to launch on warning. Others are sitting on shelves in storage. Others are on submarines, and so on. And so when you're talking about a kind of weaponry that would take a very tiny number, 0.1% of total weaponry, to pretty much destroy the global food production and essentially send all of civilization into a major tailspin, it isn't important whether we have 9,000 and they have 10,000. What's important is that zero is the only acceptable number.
Yeah. Okay, and given that laudable goal, what do you do? How do you prevent the crazies from doing something nutty with a suitcase and a small nuclear device?
You don't keep doing what you're doing, which is to further destabilize the world, ignore the changing climate that is affecting more in the more impoverished parts of the world. Don't keep dropping drones on people and creating more enemies. You stop what you're doing that promotes the crazies, and you begin to share resources. You begin to have dialogue with people like the Iranians. You begin to, rebuild the parts of the world that we're so rapidly destroying. I think we can solve these problems if we simply turn away from thinking that nuclear weapons and military are going to solve the globe's problems. I mean, we have crises all around us that don't have a military solution. So we stop thinking of security as military and start thinking of security in terms of food, in terms of climate, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of forests and, health care, education.
Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, Maureen. And if folks want to view the Nuclear Neighborhoods Project at the 3 locations in Iowa City, again, is that up for a limited time?
Well, the installations at the Public Library in Iowa City, the Solon Library, and the Hardin are up till the end of this month, and then we move parts of it and some new pieces into the Iowa Memorial Union main floor on the University of Iowa campus.
Okay. And any opportunity to see that here in Des Moines sometime?
Well, that would be wonderful if somebody there would like to help us get it set up.
Yeah. Sounds like a great project for one of our local peace groups.
Yes, I agree.
Right.
It's been fantastic, and it's interesting to watch people going through the exhibit and hear some of the comments, including at Solon with the kids show, having a little guy talking to his father about their grandfather who was an atomic vet, and the little guy, saying things to, I sure hope none of that happens to us, and I think it's good. It's good to have different audience and engaging. I sent a lot of my students over to see it, and they each of them pulled up very different things from the exhibit, things that they were unaware of, things that surprised them, things that shocked them. I think it would be great if we could also get it over in Des Moines if anybody wants to take it up.
Well, Maureen, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Maureen McHugh with Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility. And Maureen, stay on hold if you would. I want to chat with you for a second during the break.
Sure.
But I do want to thank the Immigrant Entrepreneur Summit for sponsoring this segment of the program, and remind folks that the Immigrant Entrepreneur Summit is open to everyone and is coming up on November 9th. It's a great way to learn how to start your business. I want to thank some of my other business supporters. Again, small businesses help make this show possible, including Sargent's Garage at 6th and College, just north of downtown Des Moines. I want to thank some of my restaurant supporters as well, like Tally's Restaurant Bar and Catering in Beaverdale. Also, Hawk Restaurant, that's H-O-Q, Hawk Restaurant in the East Village, where 90% of the food they serve comes from Iowa farms. I also want to thank Ritual Cafe. Ritual Cafe is at 13th and Locust, and a great place for coffee, tea, smoothies, paninis, and music. I'll be back in just 2 minutes.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live. From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Well, good morning. This is the 7th of June in the Lord's year 2010, and this is day one of webcast1live.com. We will begin with Max World Live with my special guest, Tom Coates. In just a minute, there's Tom. Wait. Howdy. And we will be live for the very first time on Webcast One Live. Someday we're going to look back on this and say, gosh, remember that old day in history? Wonder where Walter Cronkite was. He must have been around hanging there too. But actually, it's the beginning of Webcast One Live. And thank you for listening. Thanks, Rob Spearman, and everybody who's put together this project together. And we're ready to go live now. So thanks for listening to MaxWorldLive.com.
I can't tell you that it's going real well from time to time, but it is going.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back to the Fallon Forum here. A quick look ahead at the rest of the week. We've got Peter Clay joining us tomorrow. Peter worked for a long time with the Great Ape Trust and is a local expert on issues confronting rhinos and elephants and other endangered species. We're going to talk about a little bit far afield from what we usually talk about, but it's an important issue. Diversity, biological diversity. We're going to talk about that with him tomorrow. Also joining us for a new beat on education tomorrow. Again, Andrew Rasmussen with the Des Moines Education Association. We're going to talk about the core curriculum. Interestingly, Andrew and some others with the DMEA fall on the same side as some of the strongest conservatives on that issue. We'll talk about that. Wednesday, still working on a bunch of the program opportunities, but Maddie Delk with the Des Moines Playhouse joining us to talk about the production coming up, The Lord of the Flies. This is a youth production put together by a theater troupe, if you will, called Adolescent Anarchy. I love that name. Okay, Thursday, Ron Yarnell is going to join us. Also, we'll have Ann Kinzel on the show. Ann and I will discuss the situation at the Iowa Juvenile Home. And Friday, very happy to have Dr. Charles Goldman joining me to co-host a conversation with Lawrence Ferguson about medical malpractice. Okay, so a lot of medical malpractice cases end up in civil courts and produce, no great desirable result, neither justice nor an improvement in medical care. We're going to talk about that. And Ferguson brings a fairly unique perspective to that issue. He's presently a member of the plaintiff's bar in Missouri, and he was formerly the vice president in charge of claims for the Missouri Medical Insurance Corporation. So that should be a good conversation as well. Okay, so in the limited time left here, folks, I want to look at the new complaint. I mean, again, I know that there are folks saying, well, Governor Branstad will absolutely win re-election, but I'm starting to see hope for any Democrat or independent, for that matter, who might want to run a good campaign against him. This is Disability Rights Iowa. They're filing a formal complaint with the state alleging, quote, multiple ongoing violations of federal education laws at the Iowa Juvenile Home. So it's moved beyond just a conversation about tactics used to restrain kids who are acting out. The allegation now is that it's really, I mean, I know it's a DHS facility, and some have questioned whether it should be a DHS facility because it's supposed to be a school for very troubled youth. As such, it's supposed to, the kids are guaranteed the right to public education, and the allegation is that hasn't been happening. So, again, some of the issues that have been raised 10 months ago were supposed to be corrected, and yet they have not been addressed by the Iowa Department of Human Services. Disability Rights Iowa is asking the Iowa Department of Education to conduct its own independent review. That's my problem here. I don't think you're going to get an independent review from one government education under on another one government agency on another agency. The Department of Education is not going to give you a fair analysis of problems in a DHS facility. You're going to have to get somebody outside of it. The only entity in state government that might do a good job, that might be fair and balanced, is the Ombudsman's office. And the Ombudsman's office is looking into the situation at Toledo. Actually, everybody is looking into Toledo now. Again, I really want to commend Disability Rights Iowa for bringing this forward. And we will have 3 people from DRI on this program next week. And again, I think Clark Kaufman with the Des Moines Register deserves a fair bit of praise for his work at helping to expose it. All right, so what else? There was a report that green jobs, green is in quotes, green jobs up 8% in Iowa. This is put out by the what is it called again? The Capital Crossroads. Capital Crossroads is doing a lot of things, but there's a component of Capital Crossroads called a Greener Greater Des Moines. It calls for our metro area to track progress in improvements to trails, parks, other natural resources. I assume that means water as well. And the report says the area is poised for significant improvements, in part because of the $50 million bond issue that passed last year. And that's for parks, trails, new projects for rivers, streams. The idea is to make development easy on natural resources. In other words, using them minimally while meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Good stuff. And while they're at it, they should. We should also be talking about making pedestrian access a little better. I become a bit of a pedestrian Nazi. I really get kind of ticked off when I'm, for example, walking along a sidewalk on a busy street or even a not so busy street, and somebody is watering their grass. And again, I don't know why you'd water your grass in August. Again, it's supposed to go dormant. Let it be. Trust. It'll come back. But they're watering their lawn. Actually, they're watering a lawn in August that they put in July. Another, hot flash here, folks. Lawns should not be put in July. Grass is a spring and fall crop. Okay, some crops you plant in the spring, some in the fall. Some, like grass, you get 2 chances. You get May, April, May. You get September, maybe October, probably September. You get 2 chances, but you don't do it in June, July, August. Bad idea. And as a result, you got to water the dickens out of it. And especially if you use sod, you got to go crazy with the water. Okay, so maybe you make that choice and you do it, but if you are going to water it, water the grass, not the sidewalk. I don't want to have to walk along the sidewalk and have to get sprayed. I mean, sometimes the sprinklers are set up so you have a reprieve where you can get through there. I don't even appreciate that. But what really bothers me is when there's no reprieve. I either have the choice is either to get wet or to walk out in the street in traffic. Yeah, that's not acceptable. So So yeah, I hope that one component of this project is to look at greater, simple ways to improve pedestrian access. Again, I submit to you Exhibit B just an hour ago. I'm on my way down to this program. I'm walking, and I go to cross the sidewalk on Locust between 6th. Actually, I'm on the sidewalk crossing the entrance to a parking ramp between 6th and 7th, and a woman comes tearing off Locust Street into the parking ramp. I mean, if I had kept going, and I had the right to do so, and I had the momentum where it was hard for me to stop. If I kept going, Maddie would be guest hosting for me today. All right, and maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing on a number of levels. But at any rate, I just barely avoided getting hit. I went, whoa, like this. I threw my hands out like this is the woman. If she saw me, she ignored me. Now, for what it's worth, I did notice that she had a vanity plate. It was an ISU vanity plate. So suddenly I become a Hawkeye fan. All right. I just think I hope that's a component of this conversation, because we could certainly do a lot with increased pedestrian access, improved pedestrian access. Other things we did not get to talk about that we need to talk about this week, the hundreds of juvenile mandatory life prison sentences that could be appealed because of a federal ruling. There are new NSA, National Security National Security Agency revelations that are causing consternation on both the Democratic and Republican side of the U.S. Congress. And we may this week see some kind of a, quote, agreement between the EPA and Governor Branstad on the Governor Branstad. By that, I mean the state of Iowa. Same thing. We may see an agreement between those entities on livestock regulation and water quality. I doubt it is going to make environmentalists happy. We'll talk about that as it develops this week. Again, I want to thank Maddie Kane, my producer. I want to thank Webcast One Live for providing the studio. And I want to thank Fighting Burrito for sponsoring this segment of our show. Fighting Burrito, 2 locations, folks. One here in Des Moines at 13th and Locust, actually just south of Locust Ave on 13th in the Nationwide building. Custom-made burritos for $6.50. Also, they're located on 117 Welch Ave in Ames. I'll be back tomorrow with more conversation on the Fallon Forum.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.